Welcome. I'm Larry Olsen, and this is the Brain Vault Podcast. Did you know that the thoughts you're thinking right now are shaping the life you'll live tomorrow? Well, in this podcast, we just don't talk about mindset. We decode the blueprint behind behavior, performance, and possibility. This is where science meets real-world strategy, and your brain stops running on autopilot. If you're ready to turn default thinking into intentional living, you're in the right place. Well, welcome everyone. I want to welcome you to the Brain Vault Podcast, where science meets success. And you know, today's conversation isn't about, and I really want you to pay attention to what I'm about to share. Today's conversation isn't about better leadership. It's about the leadership we actually need to survive what's coming next. My guest is Maria Brinck, a global thought leader who's on a mission to break up the leadership monopoly that's quietly failing organizations, nations, and the planet itself. Born in Sweden, raised across Europe and North Africa, educated internationally, and then radically transformed. Listen to this. While living and working with indigenous communities in the Congo Basin Rainforest. And there's a beautiful picture that you've got to look for. I'm not sure if it's on her website or the info she provided us. It may be on the website, with her cuddled up with a chimpanzee. And it just says so much. You know, that old thing is a picture tells 1,000 words or says 1,000 words. Well, it definitely lives up to that. You know, Maria didn't just study leadership. She witnessed what happens when it's missing and what's possible when it's done right. She's the founder of Zynergy International and the author of the powerful new book, The Leadership We Need. And I would ask all of you to make sure you pick that up. I mean, just her introduction will spellbound you. She makes this bold claim: the leadership that's got us here won't get us where we need to go. Maria argues that collaboration over competition, service over control, and diversity of thought over dominance aren't soft, they're essential. So let's get started. Welcome, Maria, to the Brain Vault Podcast.
Larry, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you today.
Outstanding, outstanding. Here's how I'd like to get it started. Maria, when you say leadership itself is the bottleneck to our future, what are most leaders still refusing to see about how they lead?
Yeah, as you know, everything rises and falls on the shoulders of leadership. So it's crucial to have a bright future that we have the right leadership in place. And what I would say is the bottleneck currently is that we're led by outdated mindsets of what leadership is all about. We're still having, in my opinion, extremely immature leaders across the globe today that are led by their own insecurity. And it's obvious to me that we see them not only in nations, but also in top of organizations. Now, we shouldn't blame them. We all know those people. We've all, we saw them from the sandbox at, preschool to have worked with them in leadership teams in corporate America, and we see them everywhere. But it's up to us. What leaders do we want? And who do we choose to elevate into leadership and elect into leadership in our nations as well as in our organizations? So again, this is not about blaming the leaders themselves. I'm blaming you and I and the culture we have created for these leaders to excel and get to the top where they're at, to actually make decisions for us. And the decisions that are being made at the highest level today, it's not serving us. in my
Mm.
opinion. And
Amen.
many of the highest decision being made in organizations is only for the self-interest of the organization. And look who's paying for it, as far as communities, people working there, our environment. There's, it serves a very few, and the rest of us pay the price.
Yeah. And and if you want to add insult to injury, when it's mean-spirited is where I really draw the line. Having been brought up with a mentally delayed sister, only sibling, 3 years older than I was, I got to watch what some people do when don't understand or they're uncomfortable. They have a tendency to make fun or take shots at. And, this whole thing, sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. I'd rather have somebody cold cock me in the back of the head with a 2x4 and get over it than put the wrong information in my head. And I
Yeah.
think that's a lot of the challenge that we're facing and why I was so excited about having you on.
Hmm.
You've got such a distinguished background and you've worked with such epic companies that you're someone who people pay attention to, and you have the facilitation skills, not only just the knowledge and the vision of wanting us to have a more compassionate world
Uh-huh.
who values not only one another, but this incredible gift that we happen to be floating through space on Earth. Um, I wanted, how do you deal with the discrepancies between being an authoritarian and giving people instruction as to what we're going to do, as opposed to people that are leaders that are open and are asking questions as to what do you think and what do you think? Because I remember reading about you sitting in one of these indigenous groups and the leadership was listening. They were
Uh-huh.
listening to their community and they didn't even speak a word until they'd had heard everyone. That's
Ex-
almost unheard of uh, in
it,
in
it
our
it
fast
truly
pace.
is. It truly is. And before I get to that, and please, if
Okay.
I get lost, remind me of it. But something you just said, I just wanted to touch on because
Okay.
you and I had a chance before we got on live here or on the recording to speak a little bit about Scandinavia, and of course, your family coming from Scandinavia as well. And as you mentioned in the bio, me being born and raised in Sweden, among other places. It's interesting because I just came back from a leadership conference in Europe.
Mm.
And I was sitting at a table with two Americans, and I happened to hear, and they didn't know I was Swedish at the time, but there was one that was arguing for that we need a culture very similar to one where I think your sister would excel and do very well.
Mm.
And that was the Scandinavian culture. I would
Mm.
call it a very humane culture. Um, and he was arguing for how we should really look to Scandinavia, having such a high well-being and happiness, and yet high GDP, et cetera, high education, medical facilities, excellent care, et cetera. And then the other American said, well, you know what? Scandinavia is a country and a place in the world for losers. America is a place for winners.
Oh, for heaven's
And it
sakes.
really stuck with me. And there you go.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that culture and the leaders that culture provides, and where people just like your sister and others um, are not seen the way they should be. We're all gifts in this life, and we
Mhm.
have so much to learn from each other. And I bet you learned a lot from your sister.
Oh, boy.
And it's not a culture based on losers. It's a culture for humanity. And that's what we
Mhm.
should need. And at this point in our human history, there are no winners or losers. We're all in this together. As you know, we're in a polycrisis reality, and we really need to start to look after each other and care for each other and learn from each other. Um, so it just saddens me that that is still a culture that is very alive in the United States today, and even to hear comments like that at a leadership conference. So anyway, go into your second kind of reference there. It was about authoritarian versus questioning, and absolutely coming from corporate America, working myself as a sales executive and both in pharmaceuticals and biotechnology, and seeing the leadership teams and how the leaders conducted themselves. They walk in, usually a male, owns the room, are loud, usually the loudest voice, very assertive, decisive, put down the agenda and what they think is the way forward, expecting that everybody, and most of the people being yes men, would fall in line and in service to that leader, and making sure that he looks good. Now, very different in Indigenous population, probably around the world, not just in Africa, where community is everything and every member is valued highly. And not only do you sit in circles and you take in everybody's opinion, but you really take that to heart. It's a question of seeing people, listen to them, and make them feel included. We can do so much better. And the key here is the diversity of thought that brings to the table. That's the secret sauces. If we can get diversity of thought to the table, and we need it more now than ever in our humanity, because the challenges are just so great, whether it's an organization or in a nation. Things are complex and the pace couldn't be faster. We need the diversity of thought, and we're not getting it in corporate America. And it's a shame. There's just so much at stake right now that I'm hope it's going to change. But that is truly the difference between an authoritarian leader and a community leader. And then, of course, they have something else that I just would love to bring to the table here today with you, Larry, and that is how they view the world and their perspectives, because it's a perfect balance between short-term decisions and long-term decisions that's going to affect possibly generations to come. They see every decision and put it in the view of an extended family. How is this going to impact the fauna? How is this going to impact the biodiversity, the nature around us, the animals, the insect, and generations to come? And is this decision in respect to the generations that came before us? Is this the values that we've been taught? Can you imagine if we can bring that perspective into corporate America today, instead of staying as business as usual and having killed off, 74% of our biodiversity since 1970, arrogantly thinking that we're not part of that biodiversity? It's time we wake up, right?
Yeah, and one of the and very well said, by the way. And one of the challenges we face currently is anyone with any talent, anyone with humanity, anyone that could lead us out of this has probably had a little bit of blip in the radar some time in their life. And the scrutiny of the media and the reporting is the whole focus is on what's wrong, not finding out what's right. And when you just get this little 10-minute blip of the wrong, since we have an amygdala reptilian brain, we do have a tendency to want to protect ourselves. So it gets our attention, unfortunately, in a negative perspective. And so most people don't even want to put their name on the ticket unless they have an agenda. And then you've got so much money backing. And now, it used to be there was some caps placed on it. And now even our judicial system said, remove the caps. That's not, it's blocking someone's freedom, but it skews the information we receive. So as an individual, a leader has the opportunity, because they're dealing with 20, 30, hundreds of thousands of people, whatever the situation they find themselves in, and can make a real impact. I think what really ends up happening too is the individual out there who's not in that kind of a leadership position doesn't feel that they have that kind of influence. What do you bring to them to help them recognize how much power they truly have on being able to make a difference?
Absolutely. Excellent question. I love this question, because here is the reality, Larry. We have a mindset thinking that there are some people that are cut out for leadership. I think what we're seeing in the world today is There is no such thing. We all have a leader within us, and we all need to bring that
Beautiful.
out.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And I couldn't think of a more important time to do that, to get to what we talked about earlier, that diversity of thought and how we all have a gift. Ways to do that. First of all, we need to, that's why my book is called, The Leadership We Need, a New Mindset for a Brighter Future, right? It's all the mindset. The first thing that we need to hold ourselves accountable for is the bias that we have towards leadership and who we find qualified and capable to lead. Once we overcome that mindset, because we're not fighting barbarians at the gate anymore, which of course is exactly what these same leaders need us to believe to stay in power, because these same leaders would not be in power if we lived in a life of harmony and collaboration and love, right? Which we
They'd be
also
ostracized. Yeah.
exactly, which also humanity is equally, by the way, capable of, but we never see it or talk about it in leadership because it's considered weak. But humanity is so much better than what we're seeing in the world today.
Yeah.
What was that, Larry? You had a comment there?
Or it's weak or perceived as soft.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And obviously, we know it couldn't be harder because we know collaboration, relationships, and love is some of the hardest thing we're working on in our lives, and also the most rewarding things and meaningful things we have. So it's interesting. So we need first to overcome that mindset that there are people that are born into leadership or who is qualified and capable to lead. Because the reality is we all are. We all are. And another nice thing coming from Scandinavia is that I was brought up not looking for a masculine authoritarian leader outside of myself. I was brought up to look for an inner author on my life. And if you shift that mindset, you can see how powerful that is. And often I hear, oh, Maria, you're so grounded. What is that coming from? Well, there it is. If you grew up in a culture that develop or help you develop an inner leader, an inner author of your own life, you're going to start listening to that voice. And we all have it, but some of us have not ever listened to it or been trained to listen to it. So my advice for people to find that inner leader of their own lives and not being easily manipulated by an outside masculine authoritarian, whether it's a national leader, a CEO, or other, would be to really start listening. And maybe a good place to start would be to ask yourself some questions. For example, if you want to see where your passion and purpose lies, maybe a good question would be, when do I feel the most alive? And then think, who am I with? Where am I at? What am I in the process of doing? What am I celebrating? And then, of course, you can go with your unique strengths, your unique values, and create that purpose that you have in your life, and not look for finding a purpose that was created by somebody else outside of you, which I think a lot of people, and particularly in America, is looking to find purpose and they feel pretty lost right now. Well, you're not going to find it under a rock, walking down a path. For most of us, I'm not saying that couldn't happen. There are a few, lucky few.
Excuse me. Or a lot of people are waiting for permission to get their purpose. The bias is so strong that, who am I to have my own sense of purpose? I did one time and they laughed at me, or I was told to mind my own business and just, follow authority. We have such unfortunate conditioning to take that incredible leader and begin to quiet it. I talk about when I'm working with leaders, I'll walk up to one of them and I'll say, let's pretend we're both 5. And the leader will kind of look at me, and I'll usually pick the one who's probably, in most people's eyes, the most least likely to want to do this. And I always get this, okay, and always. And so I go, I'm going to knock on your door. And they go, okay. And I knock and I go, and they go, hi. And I go, hey, do you want to play? And they go, yeah. I mean, instantaneously. Then I say, now at our age, what if I knocked on your door and asked you, do you want to play?
Yeah.
How much is it going to cost? How much time's involved? I have responsibility now, and I call it the dull thinker, which is a dull T, which is an adult, where they've gotten to the point where they forgot who they are and are only paying attention to what they've become.
Yeah.
And this is what I found so fascinating about your work is your first step of any kind of transformation is awareness. And as I was reading your book, I thought, wow, this is so negative. It's so negative. It's so negative. It's so negative. But it was getting my attention. And it was so well written that I wasn't leaving it because it was getting somewhere and it was empowering. And so I wanted to ask you, in your works, because I know you do a lot of it, with working with leaders, what do you do when you're finding yourself, because you've got this inner strength too, you talked about your Scandinavian ancestry and the inner voice, when you're dealing with a leader who wants to take control over you, that wants to tell you how things are, what's a good way for people to deal with that so they don't get sidetracked and begin to buy into it? Because they've got more information generally supporting that in their brain than they do what a strong, incredible human being they are.
Well, I think a good place to start would be to acknowledge the fact that we should be very proud of how far we come as humanity and where we're at today. I'm sure both you and I are happy that we didn't even live 100 years ago with their ancestors in Scandinavia, right? There's a lot of things to be thankful for. But are we proud of also what we become in the process? Would be my question. So I think it's important to recognize that going into leaders, because leadership is hard. It's not easy. They have so much pressure on them and they need to be recognized. It's not easy, and we should be proud of how far we come. But if you start looking at what they become in the process, it opens up a lot. And I'm sure and I are in a very unique position to get to hear about it in confidential conversations that might not share with anybody outside of that room, including their significant others and loved families. So that's a good place to start. Another good place to start when they push back is to open them up to what their legacy is going to be. Because in that legacy, you can start talking about the human behind the quarterly earnings and the numbers and all the pressures, but it's something different, right? They're not going to be remembered by their loved ones because of the quarterly earnings. So that's another good way to open that leader up and kind of deflect that want to take control of you or that commanding conversation, and them being in full control, because the reality is most of them have never thought of what they become in the process or what their legacy is going to be. So I found that very successful in my executive coaching practice. What about you, Larry?
Well, I want to rally back before I answer that question to, you talked about you were brought up and you had a strong inner voice. And so what I'm asking now in a different way is, you've got someone you're dealing with who's trying to control. How does that upbringing, and it's not innately we're amazing, and yet we get conditioned. And so you've got a control freak that's trying to take you over as far as your beliefs and all of that. How does your inner strength deal with that so that you don't succumb to giving up your sense of purpose?
Absolutely. Well, ironically, we talked a little bit about the assessment of StrengthsFinder and finding your values.
Okay.
And and also, of course, create your own purpose, right? Which, by the way, I have all those assessments in the back of the book. I've gone through that process myself. And once you have great self-awareness of what your strengths are, you start using them. And of course, ironically, my first strength is, and I probably should not be proud, but ironically, it is command. Go figure. So when somebody's trying to command me, I command right back. I do not like
Okay.
to be pushed around. It doesn't
Okay.
mean that I like to control people, but I don't like to be controlled myself, if that makes sense.
Gotcha.
So, but
And how do you deal, being in command, excuse me, how do you deal with defensiveness that's naturally created by another whose strength is command?
Well, it's ironic because personally, and obviously I'm not speaking to everybody here, but I like to be challenged. I like to be challenged and I like to think on my feet. So when I
Okay.
have an executive personnel and high command and control, um, there is a certain respect there. And because I can
Mhm.
see, in a way, I can see myself in them. But the reality is, we cannot control others. And that's for me where my control stops as a commander, if you will. But I'm very much about commanding in my own will, my own opinions, my own life. Um, so it doesn't bother me personally. But I
Okay.
also can see on the direct reports the price of that. And I think
Mhm.
that's where it gets interesting for a leader with high command. When you're seeing it, that it might be something that comes very naturally to you because they most very likely could have command as well. But when you see the price, that the cost of that is when you put that command on others, that's what the need. It comes back to awareness, and
Yeah.
that
Mhm.
command is not serving them, neither their team, and it creates a disengagement and even resentfulness. And so nobody
Mm.
wins there. And once you
Gotcha.
point that out, that there is no winners, there are no winners and loser. It's a lose-lose or win-win. That's when you can get their attention. Does that make
Beautiful.
sense at all?
It does. It does. You know, you asked me kind of the same question back. And what I'll do is I will, my book is Get a Vision and Live It. And it's all about the sense of purpose and what really drives us intrinsically. And how do you bring that to consciousness? So it becomes your filter, not necessarily the direction people are trying to lead you in. And when I've got a leader that's trying to be right, if you will, which turns into self-righteousness,
Yeah.
is I'll ask them, what are they attempting to accomplish?
Yeah.
And I think you do the same thing. And once I find out what their sense of vision is, I go, well, what have you found some of the greatest obstacles in achieving that are?
Yeah.
And then they realize that they're part of the problem. But I don't have to tell them that. You follow
Yeah.
me? Because then all I'm
Yeah.
doing is creating defensiveness. Now what I'm getting them to do, as you do, is they're going, wow, I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah.
If I keep behaving like this, I'm gonna be perceived as a jerk.
Yeah.
And then, or if they're gotta be right, I'll say, well, how's that working for you?
Yeah.
And and it's basically, well, it's not.
Yeah.
And I think the real key too that you've brought up
Mm.
is not you or I having to be right.
Yeah.
We didn't just win something now because I got them to see my point of view.
Yeah.
I love what you share about we all lose or we all win.
Yeah.
And when it has to be about us, my first step in the leadership program that I have, the first rule for a leader is get over yourself. And it's
Exactly.
not that you're not amazing, you're not remarkable, you're not this phenomenal gift and have so many contributions to make. It's that it's really not about you any longer,
Exactly.
right? And I want to ask you, in the work that you've done, and this is kind of what floats your boat, Maria. This is kind of why you do this. It's not the money, it's not the fame. What are the things that happened for you that you witness that you internally go, that's why I do this?
Well, it is when I look at the world today, whether it's in organizations or what we're seeing playing out in nations today across the globe, is this rage inside of me because I know
Hmm.
intuitively, and I'm sure that you do too, that we can do so much better than this. This is not reflecting the best of us, the best of humanity. And it drives me crazy to realize that we're not being led or by the greatest gift that we have as humans. Our human potential is not even close to be seen and to be and for
Realize.
us to be led by. And of course, I bring up that currently leadership has been being monopolized since the dawn of civilization. We have had half of humanity, women, standing at the sidelines. Women, their thoughts, their voices, their opinions, their wisdom has not been taken into account. So if you look from the outside coming in and looking at humanity today, we look like we're extremely aggressive, warlike, and domineering. And absolutely we are. But we're so much more than that. And it's sad because when we read the history books, it's all about, the men and the commanders, if you will, that we just talked about. But we don't include the other half of humanity. And also we don't include the feminine and the masculine in all of us, whether you're a man or a woman, because the masculine in each individual has been so overly valued and incentivized and celebrated, whereas the feminine in each and single one of us have not. And we're paying the price right now. I would say leadership is the direct cause of the polycrisis reality that we're living in today. No doubt in my mind. And that
And
needs to change.
explain to our listeners who may not be familiar with polycrisis. Explain that to them.
Sure. So the polycrisis is it's everything from climate change to unregulated technology like AI or biotechnology, or the escalating threats from nuclear weapons would be considered the polycrisis. And if you look at, we have the Future of Humanity Institute out of Oxford looking at this, has given us 1 in 6 chances of making it through the next 100 years based on expertise from experts from all around the world, obviously not political. We have the Dooms Clock.
If we stay on the course we're on. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And we're staying on the course we're on. And of course, that means also the monopolized leadership we've seen since dawn of civilization. It's, as Einstein say, we cannot fix the problems with the same mindset that created them. So why are we? We also need to bring in the indigenous views, other minorities, and we need to have that diversity of thought that we started the podcast with more now than ever. We are living in a very shallow, short-term, narrow-viewed perspective in decision-making, and we can no longer afford to be here. The stakes are just so great at this time in human history. So we really need to break up the leadership monopoly, big time.
Amen. I tell you, the smartest thing I did was it's 28 years now since my wife and I have been married, but 30 years ago, I had her, after I met her, decided that she's the one that needs to run the company. And she had a speech and language pathology background. She was helping individuals get the left and right side of the brain working together again so they could be participating in a way that held their head high. And I am always been a firm believer that the edge that coming from the total female side, even though we all have our feminist side and our masculine side, is so much more collaborative. It's so much greater as a listener and looking at different points of view. It's also really good at examining what you were about to initiate to make sure that any bugs in it have been cleared up prior to pushing the button. And that's why I was excited to have you on, because I think too often men get intimidated by strong women. And, they put terms on it, which are just humiliating. But it's really just their lack of masculinity that they feel somehow they're going to lose their power and their position instead of gain more. And I that's what I see you contributing to the situation we find ourselves in. And I'm almost embarrassed when I'm listening to some of the leadership now and I'm going, isn't there any filter here? I mean, we're in, when you're firing all your advisors, no matter what position you're in life, whether you're running a family or running a nation, you're not listening any longer.
Yeah.
Right. And so enough of me. What I wanted to find out from you is you got people out there right now that are listening to this that find themselves at a point where they've kind of lost traction a bit. And it's kind of affecting their esteem and their sense of self, and they're questioning that. Um, and maybe they don't have that strong sense of purpose yet. They haven't had the opportunity, and I know they should get your book and at least get started on that. Um, what would you say to them that is something that they could start working on immediately, and then wrap it up by sharing how they go about finding more about you, how they can get your book, how they can get in contact, and that type of stuff?
Yeah. Um, well, and kind of bouncing off a little bit of what you said there, Larry. My book might seem like I'm all about bringing women into leadership, and I am, and it's the right thing to do. But it's more than that, because we also need to change the leadership culture, right? To
Mhm.
value and celebrate and incentivize more the feminine as well. Because we don't want just women, because what we're seeing is women become hyper masculine when they do get into leadership, because they're trying to overcome maybe some of the weakness, um,
Mm.
pre-perceived weaknesses that women have coming into leadership, and overcompensate the masculine that they have within them, and we all have within them. But I also want to make a point of celebrating the masculine, the feminine in all of us, and the diversity of thought between the masculine and the feminine that we can bring to the table. Because if you're a man and you're feeling lost, it can very much be because you also have to be hyper masculine to fit into the leadership roles that we have created based on this culture when we are bringing those forward. So I think being lost, women have been lost and sidelined for a long time, but I think also men can feel empowered if they're allowed to also be more feminine. Because the
Mhm.
reality is, it all depends. I know men that are more feminine than some of my girlfriends, and the other way around. So I think that's important. So a good place to start to find that balance and find that purpose in their lives. Goes back to a little bit what we touched on earlier, is creating your purpose. And how you create your purpose is really about asking yourself some profound, pretty tough questions and reflect. We don't take a lot of time in our lives to reflect. Of course, I do have a template in the back of the book called the Zynergy Q12 assessment to create that purpose, which is a great place to start. It has very much to do with a question that we touched on earlier of, when do I feel the most alive? And if you
Mm.
can explore that space of thinking, why is that? And who's with me? Or am I by myself? Where am I at? Am I out in nature? Am I in front of people? Am I, what am I what am I doing? And why am I doing it? It's going to open up so many doors for you and so much awareness, that I think that's a very good place to start. And then you can build from there. But we all have and can create purpose in our lives. And please start creating yours. It could have been more
Mhm.
important than now. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. And how do people find out more about you, and how can they get your book?
Yeah, so the leadership we need is available on your online favorite bookstore, also on Amazon, of course. And they can connect with me on LinkedIn, Maria Brinck, Brinck, or go to my website to check out a little bit more about my work. And yeah, take it from there. And I want to
Beautiful.
wish them all the best, and that we're all in this together. Nobody is more fit or less fit for leadership. It's just a question of bringing and creating that purpose in your life and bring it forward. and have that self-awareness that we desperately need.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, I thank you for that. I've very much, I could go on and on and on, one question after another for you, but I respect your time
Oh.
and our listeners. And I want to thank you and all of you out there to recognize that wherever you find yourself is exactly where you need to be right now. And as you're finding your purpose, it becomes your filter and it allows you to show up as this powerful force that you are, who has the opportunity to make all of us, with our mirror neurons, begin to model. As Gandhi once said, be the change you wish to see in the world. And I think too often we look outside of ourselves and all the things that need to change when we recognize it's our inner world that creates our outer reality. And Maria, you've done a beautiful job of exploring that with us. And I'm so excited about the work that you're doing. And, kudos to you. You're in the right corner. Keep boxing your way through it. So thanks again for being on. My pleasure. And all the best to all of you, and we look forward to our next opportunity.
Thank you, Larry.
You, you bet.